All right. Modules. It's like I can't say anything to the computer because she needs all the attention. It's crazy because normally she's not like this. I don't know what's going on with her. You guys have really got to meet Henry in these modules. Um, okay. Module 7, Anthroposphere. Obviously, this is a brand new sphere to Earth's systems, and I really did want to add it. And I also felt like I should separate it from climate change because climate change is sort of a different entity in how the climate is being affected by all of the spheres. But the anthroposphere is really the human interaction with Earth systems and how we're dramatically altering and affecting many of the spheres that have already existed. So we're going to cover the Anthropocene, minerals and ores, the mining process, concrete, energy resources, garbage waste, impact on the hydro and biosphere, and water demand. Some of my favorite topics. Some vocabulary, so nothing crazy. The Anthropocene. So this is going to take us back to the geologic time or the biosphere module that we did a few weeks ago regarding what the Anthroposphere is. So this is a slide that you've seen. Let me move my face. This is an epoch that we have defined by human dominance over Earth's systems. So for the last 11,500 years, we believe the Earth has been in this epoch. And we sort of defined it with this time frame because this is when the last ice sheet really started to melt further north. So our last glacial maximum, as I mentioned in the last module, was about 20,000 years ago. But 11,500 years ago was when the last ice sheets really receded, and when we really began to say, okay, now we're in an interglacial. And or we're headed towards an interglacial, because we're not, we're still in a glacial period, but we're headed towards an interglacial. And during this period, we have seen rapid population growth of our species and the development of modern civilizations. I do want to point out, and I mentioned this in geologic time and the biosphere, that we have found human artifacts in Olympia that we have dated to 15,000 years ago. So the Pacific Northwest was inhabited by our first indigenous cultures about 15,000 years ago. And that's just the earliest artifacts we found right now. We could have earlier ones that we just haven't found or don't know about, but it is a sensible, realistic scenario to suggest that modern humans did walk through the Bering Strait, which was over from Alaska over to from Russia over to Alaska, and then down the coastline to modern day Puget Sound. And they have been here since 15,000 years. But it wasn't until 11,000 years ago that we really started to define this epoch of human expansion. So again, here's where we are. We're in the Quaternary period, Holocene epoch, and we have been discussing changing this name from Holocene to Anthropocene because it is such a human-dominated period in geologic history. We also believe, and there is evidence to already suggest, that our fossil remnants that we leave behind for future humans to find, we don't kill ourselves out first, is this stratigraphic indicator of plastic. And we're going to talk about this a little bit. I think I bring in microplastics a little bit in this spiel, because it's not just going to be like full bottles, and there will be like full bottles and full tires and full plastic toys and all these other things, plastic baggies. But if we were to look millions of years in the future, all this plastic will have broken down into smaller and smaller and smaller pieces. It doesn't biodegrade, right? This plastic is not decomposing per se, but this cycle of plastics is going to be in a microplastic situation. And we will talk about that because I did a whole seminar on microplastics, and I think it's a really fascinating topic. But first, we're going to talk minerals and ores because this is sort of our effect on the geosphere. So an ore looks like this. This is a gold ore. I have a gold ore in my office. It's not quite this fancy, but it is a naturally occurring deposit of geologic matter that includes sufficient quantities of one or more valuable elements or compounds that can be extracted for economic gain. Again, this is a gold ore. So it is gold that is within a, this is probably andesite, a rock formation. These might include metals like copper, platinum, iron, lead, gold, silver, aluminum, nickel, many more. Might include nonmetals like silicon or diamond. Their uses are widespread for jewelry or electronic devices. We've been doing this for history, right? Ancient Egypt used to, I think Egypt had a lot of turquoise, but they also had a lot of gold. They had a lot of fine metals that they began extracting for jewelry. In 2022, the metals that we mined, we mined almost 2.8 billion tons of metal in 2022, and we used it for steelmaking, for construction, chemicals, energy and batteries, alloying agents. And alloy is just so iron and aluminum, two elements. When you put them together, they create steel. Which makes steel a very hard and a very durable metal. Steel is not an element on its own, but if you add iron and you add aluminum and you put them together, that is an alloy. An alloy is steel. Magnets, electronics, and then there are some others as well. The mining process, and I want to preface this too by saying that I go through this a little bit more in depth in my environmental geology class, significantly more in depth. I think I talk mining for 2 weeks because it is such an interesting process. So there's no way that I can give you an entire overrun of all of the aspects of mining. But the process is very, I don't know, detrimental is not the destructive. It can be very destructive. So there are many ways in which we mine material, and it has entirely everything to do with the depth in which that material has been buried in geologic history. Is it worth digging it out? The shape, size, and grade of all of these materials. Large deposits close to the surface and somewhat regular in shape are mined using an open pit mine method. This is, you're going to see a picture of this. So the twin sisters have an open pit mine. That's a fat lie. I wouldn't even say they're open pit. They're open mine. They don't have a pit per se, but they're open mined, which means they don't have to dig a tunnel to get in to extract that material. But she's a large deposit. So the twin sisters we mine for olivine. Deep deposits are typically mined from underground with deep vertical shafts, declines, and levels. And this is coal mining. Most of our coal mining has to be a deep underground mine because that coal is buried so deep. Once that ore is found, it is crushed into tiny sand-sized particles so that the desired compound can then be isolated. This is generally true, but there are other ways of isolating particles, and actually one of the more problematic ways of doing this, particularly actually with gold. And this was an issue in Colorado. Let me go back to gold. So there was a mine in Colorado that was a gold mine. And in the 80s, I think, we discovered this. I don't know if we discovered it, but in the 80s, there was this mine, and it was a bunch of gold. And the gold was attached to a very heavy rock. Now, the problem is you have to, I mean, economically, you have to figure out, okay, we want this gold, but how are we going to remove it from this site? And if the material is really heavy, you also have to take into consideration like the the vehicles that you have to drive up and the manpower that you have to hire to move that and the weight and all of the equipment. And so economically, it comes down to, well, what if we find a way to extract the gold in its given location so that we don't have to lug around these giant chunks of rock? We just have this gold, which is heavy enough as it is. Gold is incredibly heavy material. And so what we found is you can leach the gold, basically dissolve gold in cyanide. And so they had a whole, baby, stop. They had a whole chemical setup in Colorado out in nature where they would leach the gold from this ore using cyanide. And that way, the gold was then dissolved within the cyanide solution, and they'd bring that out. And it was meant to be environmentally like, well, we're containing the cyanide, but as you can imagine, what I'm about to say, they did not fully contain all that cyanide, and it leached into the ground, and it was a huge environmental catastrophe, and they're still cleaning it up today. Um, but it is also economical to try to crush the ore into tiny little particles. This is called mineral separation. I do a whole lab on it in my environmental geology class. But this is just a visual depiction of a general mining process. And they're all different depending on, again, location and what it is we're trying to mine. So the twin sisters, remember we've talked about the twin sisters. She's trying so hard to get out, but like she's being so naughty this morning. Henrietta. Um, the twin sisters are peridotite. Remember, they're that ultramafic green rock that forms only in the mantle. And so they're this beautiful green peridotite. And the mineral that makes up peridotite is called olivine, if you remember, or peridot if you're a gemologist, but olivine is the proper geologic word for this. And olivine, because it sits, because it is formed in the mantle, it has a very, very high melting temperature, which means it takes it incredibly hot temperatures to, ooh, pardon me, to remelt that mineral. And so we mine olivine and then we crush it into tiny, tiny little pieces. And manufacturers use it for steel making because they need steel to get to a very hot temperature for like malleability and for making shit. Um, and so they use olivine as actually an insulator as part of this steel making production. And so I got to go up to the twin sisters because I'm best friends with the former mine owner. His name's Corky. He's delightful. He's okay. I went up to this mine. I kid you not. I thought this man was like in his 60s because he was just like sprinting around and he was so sprite and agile. Turns out he's 86. This man is living his best life, let me tell you. And we drove up through, but we had to have him escort us up because there's a gate to get to this mine, and people will drive through this gate to get up high because you can do a bunch of like mountain biking shit around here. I don't know. But they lock that gate every night. And so he escorted my dad and I up because my dad really wanted to go too. And I got to go to the mine. This is what the mine looks like. So the twin sisters are entirely peridotite. This is my dad taking a picture of me, my 75-year-old dad trying to take a picture of me up on the mountains. He's cute. Anyways, the entire mountain is peridotite, so it looks very brown, but the rock, if you get up close, it's very green because it's olivine. This was a lot of rust and a lot of weathering. And this is what they do up there. So here's the Henrietta. Here's the rock, and directly by the rock, this is the rock crusher. So while they're already up there, they put the rock into this device, and it crushes the rock into teensy tiny little particles. And it's basically like gravel. So this gravel is, I think I have it even closer. Oh no, I don't. So this is as close as I get. But it's very small. They're probably like this big, and that's the product. So they pile it at the bottom of the road. So this was on the top of the mountain, mind you. Let me go back to the. So we were here. This is where the mine's at, and they pile it. They have to drive these trucks down the mountain with these smashed rocks, crushed rocks, and they just pile it at the base of the mountain. And then manufacturers buy them by the ton, basically, and they ship them off to these manufacturers. I definitely did not take 2 jars of this product because that's technically stealing, but honestly, Corky and I are best friends. He would have been fine if I had taken it. He was also like, take as much peridotite as you want. I have bins of peridotite because I was like a kid in a candy shop up here. This is mantle rock, you guys. Mantle rock. It's crazy how rare this rock is, and the fact that we have a mountain range made of it is just mind-boggling. So he was like, take all the peridotite you want. So I was just like, I want this and I want this and I want this. And my dad was like, do you need that much? No, I don't need that much, Dad. I'm gonna take that much though. Put it in my office. Okay, back to the lecture. So on top of the mountain. So this was me looking, oh, that's the bottom of the road. This was me looking on one side of the mountain. If I turned around directly, I saw this. This was a beautiful view, mind you, but it was also what they call these leaching ponds. So in the process of mining, um, and especially a mine like this, so they use explosives to help get some of those rocks off the mountain so then they can crush it to even smaller parts. Peridotite is incredibly dense, as you can imagine, because it comes from the mantle. Incredibly dense and incredibly hard rock. So they have to explode it. And Corky said they probably used explosives maybe once a year, maybe once every 2 years to just help break some of these larger rocks off into smaller bits. Um, and part of this process, both having big trucks up there, both having these huge explosive sulfurous materials up there, part of the mining process is a chemical leach. And in the Twin Sisters, it's not quite as problematic. They're not using cyanide to melt gold or to dissolve gold. But they're still using chemicals up there to help mine. So what they have is the series of leaching ponds. And I couldn't get much closer to this than this, and I apologize. But basically, it starts in high elevation and you have a pond. It's a man-made pond. And then you go a little lower and you have another pond. So basically, every pond is a collection of environmentally toxic material. And it's sort of like, all right, this one's going to filter out a little bit more. This one's going to filter out a little bit more. This one's going to filter out a little bit more. And there's a series of, I think, 5 or 6 lakes just in this mining field with a leaching scenario like the cyanide. You're going to have probably hundreds of these ponds. And they collect this incredibly dangerous material so that when it makes its way to a stream system, it's not toxic at all. And this is regulated by the EPA and it's regulated by the miners. I don't remember the name of them, but there's a mining association as well that really, really monitors the safety and the hazards associated with certain mines. And so Corky was like, yep, they come up once a year and they check our leaching ponds and they make sure everything's hunky-dory. And with this particular mine, that's an okay period to check once a year. And you're like, that's only once a year. They should be checking it more often. But keep in mind, this is on the top of a mountain. They actually close for about 6 months out of the year because of the snow. And it's just not accessible to get up there. So they're only really mining about 6 months out of the year. So checking it once a year is actually pretty reasonable. But there are mines that run year round that they definitely need to get checked more and more frequently. And there are a lot of negative impacts on mining. There's a lot of natural environment that is lost because of this. Uh, because you are most open pit mines have to use some explosives of some kind, and that's going to get a lot of small material up in the air. And if it's wind blown, it can be really, really toxic. Acid rock, because yes, gold is leached with cyanide, but they do a lot of other leaching with acids and that can get into the groundwater. Figuring out how to uh, uh, get rid of the rock that is left behind. So obviously, if you're extracting an ore, you're extracting a very specific part of a rock, right? You're extracting the iron in a rock, or you're extracting the gold or the silver. But the rock that's left over from that ore, you're like, I don't want that. So the disposal of that rock can also be really problematic. And you have to be very careful with where you put it. Tailing storage, tailings are also sort of a waste rock remnant of mining. And then smelting. Ooh, smelting is super problematic. We no longer have any smelters left in Washington, but there is a smelter left in uh, Canada, right across the border from, it's in Eastern Washington, so it's right across the border from Eastern Washington, and it's right on the Columbia River. So a smelter, smelting actually goes back to ancient times when we discovered how to remove iron from different rocks. Basically, uh, certain elements have different melting points. Iron in particular was really famous. So iron had a lower melting point than some of the rock that it's host in. And so they would heat this rock, and the first thing that would melt out of it is the iron, right? So they'd melt the iron out of this rock, leaving the iron very pure, and then they'd build these swords. And that was, quote unquote, the Iron Age of history. But that was like some of the first smelting that we did was to extract some of these minerals that had very low melting temperatures. And we have a whole process doing this now in whole manufacturers, but it releases a bunch of carbon dioxide because we need a bunch of coal for it. And it releases a lot of really problematic toxic waste in the meantime as well. Um, so smelters are incredibly detrimental to the environment, but we still do it. And the reason we still mine, oh, wait, that's one of my favorite topics too, is obviously we need these resources, right? This isn't like a let's go explode the earth. We need these resources. This is sort of a combo of an open pit. So this would be a mined out open pit, similar to the Twin Sisters. But this is a deeper mine, and I am going to talk about this is an underground mine, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that here in a second. But this is sort of the cross section of what a mine looks like if you go underground. With the Twin Sisters, obviously there's no underground component to it, but there are some mines that have an open pit and an underground portion. This is one of my favorite topics to talk about because it's very controversial. Uh, at the bottom of the Atlantic Ocean, maybe the Pacific too. Oh, this is Pacific, pardon me. I know they're also in the Atlantic, but in the bottom of the Pacific seafloor, um, there are these nodules, these like round baseball size. I mean, you can kind of see this is baseball sized nodule. Um, and uh they've been formed over hundreds of thousands of years, so they take a while to grow, and it's sort of this like concretion of building and building and building up over time. And we've discovered that these nodules hold just a fuck ton of manganese, cobalt, nickel, copper, and a bunch of other rare earth elements. Now, a lot of these elements we need for our cell phones and for, that's me, angel baby princess, who's coming back this way, um, and other electronics. So this has been ongoing for a while. Does it tell me what year it was? This was like when I saw this talk, it was like in 20, I want to say it was like 2020. So this has been ongoing for like 6 to 10 years, this controversial um, concept on how do we mine these? Because we need these rare earth elements. They're at the bottom of the ocean. And obviously they're part of the deep ocean uh, ecosystems. So there have been a lot of talk, and on top of that, because it's in the ocean, a lot of different countries are sort of vying for this mining opportunity. Uh, and so there have been a few options on do we use this robot? So Germany sent a robot, yeah, the Geomar, and the Belgium and Germany got together and they made this robot that would come up and pick up these nodules from the ocean floor. But people are like, that's taking a long time. That's going to cost a lot of money because you have to send this robot down, pick up one at a time individually, put them in a bin, blah, 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 blah. It is destroying ecosystems. I think this is a sea sponge. Uh, Henry is being so, what are we stuck on? What's happening? What's going on? This is not comfortable for me. Her leg is like, okay. And so the other argument is, why don't we just throw a net down at the bottom of the ocean and just scrape up all these nodules with a net? So this is the controversy, right? Because of course, all the environmentalists are like, you are going to destroy bottom ocean ecosystems if you just throw a net down and scrape up these nodules. But the net would be cheaper, it would be faster, it could collect more nodules. So this is a really interesting mining issue. Obviously, I'm all for like, okay, let's just spend more money and use a robot. I don't want to destroy ecosystems for human gain. Um, but there are a lot of people who have degrees in economics that are like the amount of money this will cost and the time that it will cost is not economically worth going down to collect these nodules. So instead, we spent 6 to 10 years arguing about it as one died. Um, let's jump gears a little to concrete. And I chose to talk about concrete because it is applicable to where we are. Because we have a whole town up the North Cascades Highway called Concrete. And that's because there is a giant limestone quarry uh, in Concrete that you cannot access. And believe me, I have tried. The bar, like, because there's like a road bar, is like this thick, so you can't even like accidentally drive through it. I've tried. But limestone, if you remember, is crushed up seashells into tiny, tiny little powder. It's a calcium carbonate, and we use limestone for concrete. We use 4 billion tons of concrete each year. So the cement used for concrete is 80% calcite, which is the makeup of limestone, which is CaCO3. We're going to come back to that because that's important. And 20% clay. The mixture is heated to a very, very, very hot temperature, almost 1500 degrees Celsius, to produce this silicate compound that is then cement. In this process, so because this compound is CaCO3, in this process, hi, sweet angel baby, CO2, carbon dioxide, is released. So cement and concrete is actually the highest producer of anthropogenic carbon dioxide in the world. It's incredibly problematic. But we need concrete for building and for construction. And we had a concrete plant up in Concrete. It has since been shut down. We actually don't mine limestone from that limestone quarry at all anymore. This is our carbon budget, which I think I might bring back next module for climate change. I don't actually remember. Basically, these are the inputs and outputs of carbon dioxide. It's on a cycle, right? It's on a system. And concrete, let me find it, let me find it, let me find it. Here's cement production. I guess it goes with fossil fuels. Um, is the biggest producer of carbon dioxide into our atmosphere. Uh, the other thing to note is because we mine concrete with limestone, it is absolutely a compound that will run out. And we're starting to see a shortage of cement. Hi, sweet angel baby, come here. We're starting to see a shortage of cement across the world. So we got to start getting creative. Energy resources are another important facet from this area. We're going to come back to coal. So I've talked about coal. The formation of coal is as usually this tropical, marshy, swampy environment is anoxic, meaning there's no oxygen present in this environment. So as this material is buried, it's not decomposing because you need oxygen. Henrietta, I love you so much. You need oxygen to decompose this material. And so because it's not decomposing, it's getting pressurized and compacted over time. And as it gets compacted and compacted and compacted, it turns into different grades of coal. Anthracite is the most purest form of coal. Bituminous, we actually have bituminous here in Skagit County. So it's a certain percentage of carbon, basically. But anthracite is the purest form of coal. And we do have anthracite in the world, but our coal here in Skagit is bituminous. So Washington coal is about 66 to 2.6 million years ago. So remember, I was saying that the Carboniferous period produced the highest amount of coal reserves in the world, and it did, but not here in Washington. Washington, it came from much more recent periods of time. And we have a substantial coal reserve in Washington. So there's quite a bit down here in southern Washington, but up here in Skagit, we have the Coketail and the Hamilton mines, both of which are shut down now. And then in Bellingham, we have a significant amount of coal reserves, and they had more coal than, I actually don't remember if they had more coal than we did. But Coketail and Hamilton were our predominant coal mines. And Coketail and Hamilton were actually one of the reasons that Mount Vernon is here today. We didn't begin as a coal mining town. We began as a logging town. I get this mixed up sometimes, but we began as either logging or mining. Not coal, though. We were mining silver. predominantly. I think we started as logging, and then we found mining, and then we found coal. And coal was a huge economic input into Mount Vernon, and it brought in hundreds and thousands of people to this area because it brought work. Um, and people loved this area. The Cokedale coal was deposited and formed in the Eocene epoch, so 65 million years ago, which was also about when the dinos died. So it was probably actually directly after the dinosaurs died. And this was the same period that the truck nuts were deposited. The truck nuts were deposited about 55 million years ago, but this coal was deposited about 10 million years prior, which is, again, geologically not that long. Oh, here we go. And at that time, Cokedale Mine was in an environment that was on the shoreline, and it had to be swampy. It had to be marshy and swampy at the time. So this is an image of the Cokedale Mine, and it produced 180,000 tons of coal in its lifetime. It ran from about 1891 to 1904, so not very long, 15 years, 14 years. But it ran for long enough that enough people were employed at this mine for quite a significant amount of time. The Bellingham coal mine is my favorite because it's fucking nuts, y'all. Here is a map of Henrietta. So, here's a map of Bellingham. Here's BTC. Let me find it. I guess Alderwood. Here's I-5. This is downtown Bellingham. This mine, still to this day, and apparently my best friend says that you can find the entrances to this mine. Do not. You guys, I cannot emphasize this enough. For the love of all that is holy, do not ever go into an old mine shaft. I have heard so many nightmare stories of getting lost, but just like dying in an old coal mine shaft. But what this is saying is that all of Bellingham basically sits over this old mine shaft that gets incredibly deep. So there's an entrance here, and the crazy part is it gets deeper closer to the ocean. I don't know who designed this, y'all. I have no who thought this was a good idea. Some dead white dude, honestly. Um, the deepest portion of this mine is closer to the ocean front, meaning that it's going to flood. They've shut this down, obviously. We do not mine coal out of this mine anymore. In fact, there is absolutely no coal coming out of Skagit or Whatcom counties any longer. I think there's only 2 counties in Washington that are still actively mining coal, and they're in southern Washington. However, if you live in Skagit and you have seen these coal mines go up and, or sorry, these coal trains go back and forth, we do have trains that still carry coal. The coal is coming from either southern Washington, Oregon, or California, but there is a coal refinery up in BC. And so we send the coal up there to be refined and then utilize it in different places. And bituminous coal, so the coal that we get out of this area, is used for smelting. So remember I talked about how smelting is the melting of a rock to extract one component that has a lower melting temperature, like iron. This is how they got iron out of rocks. And you need bituminous coal for the smelting process because it's got carbon in it, but bituminous coal, oops, is not quite as pure as anthracite, so it burns a little bit differently. It still gets to a hot temperature, but it burns differently than pure coal, which is what they want for smelting. So all of our coal in this area likely went to smelting in some capacity, but we no longer mine. But this is so nuts to me that the entire city of Bellingham is under this, or is over this mine, and the deepest portion is by the water. Who thought that was a good idea? Anyways, I gotta keep going. We also need gas and fossil fuels and natural gas and petroleum and oil. Skagit has 2 oil refineries out in Anacortes. They're right next to each other. I have one of my dear friends is an environmental consultant for one of the oil, I think the Sinclair oil refinery. I probably should know, but she and I were talking about exactly what it is she does. And she actually is like, I can't actually say that much because it's an international thing because they get petroleum from international places, from other uh, countries. They refine it there, and then sometimes they send it out to those other countries. Sinclair, we have a lot of Sinclair gas stations around here. It's the one with the dinosaur that helps. Um, but she's like, I am not legally allowed to say too much. But she was like, half of my job is actually just reading uh, legal jargon, where she just has to sit down and make sure that they're following the laws to the environmental laws to a T. And then the other half is doing the actual analysis, where she does chemical analysis of the air as because they get the air quality reports pretty daily. She's like, we see them daily to see what is being emitted from these stacks. Okay, sorry, I went on a tangent about that. Petroleum and natural gas also formed millions and millions of years ago, but they formed from um, tiny, tiny sea organisms known as plankton and foraminifera. And this foraminifera and plankton settled at the bottom of the ocean and then immediately got buried and didn't decompose entirely. And then more sediment and more sediment got laid over it. This is how oil has formed. Oopsie. So over time, this oil, these foraminifera and this plankton get compressed, and they don't decompose because they're not in an oxygen-rich environment. You need that oxygen-rich environment to decompose something. So over this hundreds of thousands of years, they form oil. Now, some of the remnants of this oil formation in a very trapped system. So the oil is trapped by very impermeable rocks like sandstone and shale, which are both sedimentary rocks that form at the bottom of the ocean. Oh my God, Henrietta. And part of the formation of this oil over these hundreds of thousands of years is it releases methane and other really important natural gases that we need. So when we mine oil, we're also mining for this natural gas. This is shale. And where am I going with this? Okay. So this is shale. So this is the impermeable rock that oil would be trapped in. There's several types of fossil fuels, but all of them involve the storage of organic matter in sediments or sedimentary rock. And this organic matter is important because organic matter is predominantly made up of carbon. So this is our coal. Coal is just straight carbon. It's C. That is its element, carbon for from the periodic table. Oil's a little bit different. It's a hydrocarbon, so it's carbon that is also attached to different hydrogens. Um, but basically, these fossil fuels are rich in carbon, and this ultimately originates carbon dioxide that has been taken out of organisms millions of years ago through photosynthesis. So again, coal is built of plants. Remember, plants need photosynthesis to grow and thrive. And that means they're taking in carbon dioxide for the process of building their body mass. That's the same with these the plankton and the foraminifera that form oil. When they were alive, they were taking in carbon dioxide to form their body mass. So this is why when we burn these fuels later on, it releases carbon dioxide because these are just organic compounds that formed millions of years ago. So the most important fossil fuels that we have are actual fossil organisms from coal, oil, and gas. This is oil and gas reservoirs in the United States. And forgive me, I don't have a year here. This isn't this year. I want to say this is like 2020. It might be earlier than that too. But basically what we're looking at are the different oil and gas reservoirs in the United States. I know Henry's angry about it. This is the coal in the United States. So actually most of our coal comes from the Midwest and eastern portion of the United States. Now, I wanted to show both of these back to back because you'll note they're very similar. They have, like most of our reservoirs, are in the same locations. And you're like, that's strange. Why? Ah, so glad you asked. This is going to come back to environment. We're talking about coal being formed in swampy, marshy situations. Oil has to form from plankton or foraminifera that form in the ocean, meaning that much of what we are finding were from environments that were marine. in history. So this was the Western Interior Seaway that sat over a lot of the United States. We believe at least 5 times in history. And when it was here for hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years. This wasn't just a popped in and popped out. This would be during a time of interglacial, when there were no glaciers on the poles, because all of that ice had melted into the ocean. So our sea level had risen dramatically. And because of that, this ocean was able to sort of find the topography through Midwest United States. We have some weird shale that has oil reserves in the eastern United States here, and we believe this has to do with, oh, I didn't put it in here, sorry. It's in my environmental geology slides. We believe there was a giant lake that sat over this area at one point, very similar to the Great Lakes. Boop, here, sat over this area and formed a shale. And the shale is now the impermeable rock that sits host to a lot of um, oil reserves. So if we go back here, this area here in the northeast portion of the United States, we believe at one point hosted this giant lake that is now an oil reservoir, oil and natural gas. So mining results in exposure of rock to weathering, both within the mines, and ore processing involves crushing and grinding. No, this is all mining. Okay, I don't know why I put the mining one in here, but implications of oil. Uh, I'll just say, because I know. There's a lot of implications into mining oil. In fact, one and natural gas. So if you're probably, many of you are probably familiar with the term fracking. So fracking is the process of extracting the natural gas portion, this portion, from that oil reservoir. Oil is also an incredibly dangerous process to extract. All of this material, as you can imagine, over hundreds of thousands of years, is building a lot of pressure as it is forming. There's a lot of gas that is being released as the oil is being formed, which means there's going to be a lot of pressure that is building up and building up and building up. And fracking can be incredibly dangerous because you have to very intricately and delicately infiltrate this impermeable rock to extract that gas. And if you do it wrong, you're going to get an explosion. And this fracking process creates earthquakes, and can create a lot of damage physically in an earth system. If you do it wrong, I mean, there's so many ways to do this wrong. The process to actually extract oil and to get the oil out takes years. Do I dive into this? It might have been it's so intricate that I don't even know if I talk about it in environmental geology. It is like a multi-step process, and it takes years from finding the oil reservoir to actually start extracting it, because of the process that it takes to get down into it. And it's incredibly dangerous. And if you mess up in any of these steps, you could spill oil off into the ground. And if you're close to a groundwater source, that's going to immediately, oh my God, words are so hard this morning. It's going to get into the groundwater, which is bad, right? Groundwater is what we drink. So there are a lot of problems associated with oil and gas extraction, the leaching and the contamination. That's the word. Oh my God, I'm a mess. The possible contamination into our groundwater is incredibly difficult, but we need petroleum. We need oil and gas. So again, until we find a permanent substitution for this, we're going to be mining oil and gas for the foreseeable future. And one thing I'll say, and I'm sure many of you have heard throughout history, is that this is a very finite resource. Once it's gone, it's gone. It takes hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years to form. So this isn't just something that we can be like, oh, let's just pop this into the oil formation tube in this manufacturing thing. This is something that once we use it, we use it. And we've gotten a good chunk out. So that's just something to keep in mind. I have a hybrid car, and she's beautiful. Her name's Polly, and I love her. Okay, garbage waste. I think I have a few little snippies on garbage waste. Um, because it's important, but I'm also like, not the most important waste that we make. Or pardon, not the most anthropogenic problem, but it is a problem, which is why I put it in here. So just from 1960 to 2018, the tons of waste that we have deposited into landfills, etc., has risen from under 100 million to almost 300 million tons of garbage a year. It's a lot. And we are expanding our recycling, but what you'll note is that most of the material that we recycle, most of the material that we try to recycle actually doesn't get recycled. It goes into landfill waste. We're trying to do more composting, and we do combustion with energy recovery. This is actually a really interesting way to also get rid of garbage. You don't want to burn your garbage necessarily in like a fire pit out back because that will produce a lot of toxic gases and a lot of toxic fumes. However, there is ways to collect those fumes and utilize it for an energy resource. And I don't actually know that much about it because I don't want to say it's a new technology. It's been going on since 1980. But it's stayed relatively consistent since then. Like we haven't really found a way to capture this as an energy and really utilize it globally. The largest landfills in the world look like this. I don't know where this was formed. There are EPA restrictions on how to build a landfill now, and I don't talk about that in here because it is a little bit more in depth. But there are EPA regulations on building a landfill. It's not just like dig a pit and dump trash into it. There's a lot more that goes into it with layering plastic and cement and more plastic and more cement so that you don't get this leaching. Because this garbage, as it sits, it's going to start to decompose. Even if it's a lot of plastic, you're going to have food waste in there. You're going to have pet waste in there. You're going to have a whole bunch of different things that will decompose. And as part of that, landfills contribute significantly to greenhouse gas emissions. There's a lot of methane that comes out of landfills, and we'll talk methane next module. So this can contaminate the soil and water and release harmful toxins into the ground. Earth's methane, so this is the same carbon. Let me find it. Oh, landfills and waste right here. Boop. So this is the landfills and waste. It contributes a significant amount of methane and greenhouse gas emissions into the atmosphere. So figuring out what to do with our waste has become a whole task. Basically, this whole module is just me saying, if you want to get into geology, environmental geology is the way to go. Because we need more environmental consultants to figure out how to solve some of these problems. The largest landfill in the world is really close to Reno, Nevada. Fun fact. And it is 995, does it say? Spans 1,900 acres. I don't know where this number is coming from. 995 what? What does that mean? Largest landfill spans 1,900 acres. So this is 1,400 football fields. It can accept 13 megagrams of waste per day, and it's expected to be able to accept waste for over 250 years at current rates. Okay, but this is where this blue line, this combustion with energy recovery here, comes into play because Nevada's doing this really cool thing where we are collecting this landfill gas and it produces power. Like, yay for productivity. So it's producing enough gas, toxic gas and not fun fumes, but it's powering 11,000 homes in southern Nevada. One of the problems that I have with this location for a landfill, and you'll see we have some landfills here in Washington too, along the Columbia River, as if that's a smart idea, whatever, is that some of these landfills are in the Southwest. And we learned that in geosphere and hydrosphere, we learned that in chemical weathering, higher temperatures promote faster chemical weathering. This is going to be the same thing with the decomp of this garbage. So in higher temperature regions like Nevada and Arizona there, the higher temperatures that we're seeing are actually going to help decompose this material much faster, which you're like, well, that's great. Isn't that what we want? That means it's going to produce that much more gas, that much faster. And if we find ways to collect that and utilize it, awesome. But that's not necessarily what we're doing with all of these landfills, unfortunately. So how is this impacting our hydrosphere and biosphere? This is our watershed. This is the Salish Sea watershed, meaning that everything that we get in this little green box here, all of the water that is associated with this green box, all the rain, all the snow, all the river systems, stream systems, all of this feeds directly into our Salish Sea. So this is the ultimate basin where this water and this material collects. And I say everything because the minute we contaminate anything in this area, all of that contaminant is going to go into the Salish Sea. The other large watershed we have in Washington is the Columbia River watershed, and it's by far one of the largest watersheds in the continental US. It expands 5 states, pardon me. 6 states. Oh my God, I'm a mess. It expands several states, and basically all of these river systems, stream systems feed their way into the Columbia River and eventually out into the Pacific Ocean. We have also talked groundwater, and I'm sort of recapping some of these topics because we're going to bring it all together here in a second. But remember that groundwater is filling the pore space in soil, and it seeps into the ground. The time that it takes groundwater to go from Mount Baker to the Pacific Ocean. So if we get a rainstorm on Mount Baker and Mount Baker's soils absorb some of that water and that water becomes part of the groundwater system, it will take an average of about 7 years for that water to make its way to the Pacific Ocean. That's not a whole lot of time. It seems like a lot of time, but it's not a whole lot of time. And mind you, some of this water is going to find its way to like a stream system. Some of it's going to find its way to a lake system. Some of it might get evaporated. It's all part of the water cycle. But it takes on average about 7 years for precipitation from Mount Baker to make its way to the Pacific Ocean. Down here in Skagit River Flats, we have a lot of other problematic contaminants that make its way into the groundwater and out into our watershed. Human impacts are really affecting our watersheds and our ecosystems. Stormwater runoff is really problematic. All of these drains, and if you look at some of these drains, they say runs off directly into the ocean. Don't pour contaminants into this drain system. Oil is a big one, but actually the biggest contaminant from the road, and I don't remember the name of the chemical, but there's a chemical that they put on road tires to help with durability, and they put them on the tires of your car. But as you drive, this chemical is basically depositing itself onto the road. And it's an incredibly toxic chemical for fish and for marine wildlife. And if that gets into the road, it will get into the drains. And when it gets into the drain, it will go into the ocean. The other problematic proponent of this is livestock. Livestock like to poop. And we have a lot of livestock in Skagit County. We have a lot of cows, a lot of horses, a lot of sheep, a lot of goats. And anytime these animals poop, we leave that poop, right? It's livestock. We're not going to go try to pick it up like we would a dog, which you should if you have a dog. But their poop, because a lot of times we feed our livestock specific food to make them fatter, give them steroids, give them medication, this poop can contaminate the seawater. If you have a dog, I will judge you harshly if I see. In fact, I have gotten into full-blown arguments with strangers who have been walking their dog. I see their dog take a shit. I'm like, do you have a doggy bag? No, I don't have a doggy bag. Why do you have a dog if you don't have doggy bags and you don't pick up their poop? And I understand to an extent. I get a lot of people that are like, well, isn't it more natural to just let the poop decompose than to add plastic into our landfills? And here's the thing. No, it is not, for a number of reasons. First of all, dog poop carries other doggy contaminants like parvo, which is a disease that dogs can contract that's very dangerous and can be very deadly to them. But that's not the only thing. The other thing that it has is fecal coliform bacteria. Humans have this in their poop too. Fecal coliform bacteria is incredibly detrimental, and it is really affecting a lot of our marine organisms. I'm sorry, I'm about to get on a soapbox, so just like emotionally prep yourself here. If you let your dog poop on land, that poop will decompose. into the ground, especially on a rainy day, and it will make its way into a stream system and eventually out into the ocean. But this area is particularly abundant with what we call filter feeders. These are our clams, these are our mussels, these are our oysters. We have just an abundant variety of these filter feeders. So basically, what a filter feeder does is it sits on a rock, and when the tide comes up or when it is covered with water, it filters the water through its digestive system, and it basically takes in all of the proponents of that water. So it takes in chemicals, it takes in plankton, it takes in dissolved uh, ions from stream systems. So this is something we talked about earlier. The dissolved proponents of a stream system, clams, mussels, oysters, they all benefit from that. There's a lot of nutrients in that. However, if you get fecal coliform bacteria in a filter feeder, they will also consume that. And what we're finding is this fecal coliform bacteria is dramatically affecting their ability to reproduce, and it is making them sick. The other really fun thing about this is if you've ever walked to a beach and there's a big fat sign that says red tide, this is, that's actually technically cyanobacteria, but cyanobacteria is part of a harmful algal bloom from this bacteria that is sitting in the water. So I don't think people understand sort of the domino effect that goes with some of these contaminants that we're letting into our ecosystems, because as soon as they're in our filter feeders, our sea stars eat clams, otters eat clams. Look at this little guy. Do you want to hurt this face? Actually, these guys are super vicious, but still, no, we don't want to hurt them. Octopi. We have two incredible species of octopi in the Pacific Northwest. We have the giant Pacific octopus, which is very famous. We also have the ruby octopus. So this was Hank. He and I were buddies because I do also work at Padilla Bay. And we have octopi there sometimes. And he was a ruby octopus and he loved me. We were best friends. He died. They don't have very long lifespans. But these guys eat shellfish. And if they're eating contaminated shellfish, they're also going to get sick. And this is going to dramatically alter these species as well. Because this idea is that these guys, our shellfish, are consuming this fecal coliform bacteria, right? And it's tiny little bits of fecal coliform bacteria that they're consuming. It's making them toxic. It's affecting a lot of their reproductive scenarios. But our octopi and our otters need a lot of this shellfish to survive. So once you are high enough up in the food chain, if you are a predator, if you are a tertiary consumer, you're consuming enough of these organisms below you that the toxicity within these organisms is going to biomagnify. It's going to get greater through every trophic level, basically every level of a food chain. This toxin is going to get higher and higher and higher. And this is a problem in orcas right now. Do I talk orcas? Okay, so here's a better depiction of this. If you're a mayfly and you're consuming a toxin, this bluegill fish has to eat a lot of mayflies, so it's going to have a little bit more toxin in it. This bass has to consume a lot of bluegills, meaning it's going to get a lot of toxins in it. And then finally, up to us. If we're consuming a lot of bass, we're going to get a high dosage of this initial toxin, even though the bass isn't necessarily consuming this toxin alone. It's just consuming things that have consumed this toxin. And this goes back to the fecal coliform bacteria. But this is also problematic with plastic. So microplastics are a huge problem in the ecosystem. And I guarantee that you probably have at least read one article about we're finding microplastics in breast milk. We're finding microplastics in human organs. And you're like, but we're not consuming it. No, you're right. We're not. But we are consuming organisms that have consumed other organisms that have consumed other organisms that are consuming this microplastic. Now, here's the big problem with microplastics. Okay. It's not that they are necessarily toxic. And to be fair, there probably are some plastics out there that are toxic. That have a little bit of toxination in it. The problem with microplastics isn't that they're toxic, it's that they're considered a filler. So these are consumed a lot by plankton in the ocean. very small organisms, because basically plankton are stupid. They don't really have brains. And they see something floating and they'll consume it. Um, and before plastic was a big deal, the consumption had some sort of nutritional value to it, right? Microplastics have absolutely no nutritional value. However, they'll fill the belly of the plankton. So the plankton will consume this, but it has no nutritional value, but the plankton's full, so it's not going to go seek more food. It basically starves this plankton to death. And so this is happening with larger and larger marine entities. And it's getting so bad to the point where if you're not familiar with the Salish Sea, we have two species of orca. We have our southern resident orcas, and we have our transient Biggs orcas. And the Biggs orcas eat seals and sea lions, and they're living their best life. They're actually very healthy right now. Our sea lions are at carrying capacity, so we have a huge seal population. And so our Biggs orcas are living their best life. We have three resident orca species, or three resident orca pods, J, K, and L. And our resident orcas only eat king salmon. That's it. That is all they eat. And what we're finding is that through biomagnification, the orcas are actually consuming more microplastics. Because these salmon have been consuming organisms that have been consuming microplastics. And if an orca starts to starve, it starts to metabolize its blubber. And as it's metabolizing this blubber, much of its blubber is host to these microplastics. And so it's effectively starving to death. Not only are there not enough king salmon for the orcas right now, but they're sort of metabolizing the blubber that's already there, and it's got microplastics in it. So it's making these orcas incredibly vulnerable to other diseases and other sicknesses because they're effectively starving to death. I know this is really sad and I'm really sorry, but I think it's a really important topic to talk about. And so I also don't know if you've seen, I should have been putting slides up here, and obviously I'm going off on a bird walk, but two orcas have given birth already this year, and actually I think there have been three. Three orcas have given birth, and two of the calves have died from malnutrition. Just something to keep in mind. You know, it's an issue that a lot of humans around here are actively working on. It's not an issue that we're like, well, it's good riddance. These orcas are very meaningful for this local culture in this local area. So we're working on it and we're trying to help the orcas as best we can. But in a lot of ways, damage is done, right? So microplastics are so problematic in the ocean. And there is, in this moment right now in the Pacific, there is a literal island of garbage that is floating around. And I think the last time we measured it, it was like 2 miles across or something. And that is contributing significantly to microplastic formation. So this is over the years. In 2008, we had 41.28 microplastics per cubic meter. We are forecasting, so we're almost to 2030. We're forecasting 160.9. We're forecasting 520 cubic meters of trash. That's a lot of microplastics. So it's a fun topic to talk about. Hold on. We're already on such a long. Okay, we're almost done. I'll touch on this because I think it's also important. Because this touches particularly on Skagit, actually. So another contaminant that we have struggled with in the past is fertilizers. Oh, sorry, the words. Fertilizers contain nitrogen and phosphorus in them, and these are very, very important nutrients for plants. They're actually what we call limiting nutrients. Meaning that, plants need carbon dioxide, water, and sunlight to form, but they also need other nutrients to sort of help build their biomass. And some of these nutrients that are really important are nitrogen and phosphorus. So basically, when they run out of nitrogen and phosphorus first, they stop growing as fast. So humans realized this and we were like, well, let's put them in fertilizers and let's just add this to our farmland. And so we began building these fertilizers that held a good amount of nitrogen and phosphorus. But as you can imagine, we water this agricultural land. We get a lot of rain in this area. And it's not just this area, this was global. And this nitrogen and phosphorus began running off in our stream systems and eventually out into our ocean. Now, as you can imagine, it's not just our agricultural plants that like nitrogen and phosphorus. There are other plants that need and enjoy this too, including marine plants and algae. So algae was just hanging out in the ocean, living its best little algae life. And nitrogen and phosphorus comes running off from the land. And they're like, oh, this is great. We don't have enough of this in the ocean. And we would get these massive algal blooms because of this nitrogen and phosphorus runoff. And you're like, well, this sounds great. We need algae because algae produces oxygen for human consumption. And yes, that's great. However, these algal blooms are so large that they actually block the sunlight from reaching the ocean, the inside of the ocean, which might cause bottom plants to stop growing. We have a lot of like eelgrass and other sort of seaweed and algae that need sunlight from the base of the ocean to grow. So if it's covered by this algae, that's going to keep that from growing. The other issue with this is algae doesn't have a long lifespan. I don't know, a week or two. And when that algae dies, in the process of decomposing, it takes in oxygen. And so when this massive quantity of algae dies in the ocean, it just sucks up all the oxygen that's in the water here. And this is incredibly problematic for other fish and other organisms who need that dissolved oxygen to thrive. And so it creates what we call these dead zones. Basically, it's a section of the ocean that is so anoxic because all of this oxygen has been taken up by the death of this algae, that it doesn't allow a lot of organisms to thrive. And we have a dead zone just off the coast of Washington here. Now, most of the dead zones are actually predominantly in the southeast and the eastern portion of the United States, where we have high agricultural communities here and high agriculture. So a lot of nitrogen, phosphorus runoff here. Same with Europe over here, Japan, it's pretty big, but here in the US is probably our massive dead zones. So we are working on fertilizers that are a little bit more natural that allow for plant growth and plant stimulation without necessarily adding nitrogen and phosphorus to a marine system, which is going to affect many, many ecosystems. This is our watershed again. I actually don't know why I put this slide in here. It's fine. Finally, we've been talking about watersheds. We've been talking about ecosystems, contaminants into our groundwater. And I want to end this kind of dark and very long lecture, and I apologize, on water demand, because this has also been something that's been very prevalent in the US coming up. So water demand is the function of the population and how we need water, how we use water, and the different functions of that water. We use in the US in 2005, so this was 20 years ago, we used approximately 3,300 billion gallons. So this is trillion, 3 trillion gallons of water per day for in-stream use. So this was water used but not removed from a river. This was 410 billion gallons per day for off-stream use, where we use it for thermoelectric power, irrigation, public supply, so that's us drinking water, that's bathing water, and then industry. 100 billion gallons per day for consumption use. And I want to end on this because I like to talk about this in all of my classes. And many of you, in fact, many of my students in all my classes are like, oh yeah, I've heard of this and you should read about this. And I'm like, please, because more information is coming out about this. So there's an issue with data centers. And data centers, Henrietta, I swear to sweet mother of God, data centers are like ChatGPT, are Google, are these giant search engines or AI centers. And the problem is AI and these search engines and these data centers are becoming so, I don't know if necessary is the right word, but they're becoming so expansive And a lot of different companies are really expanding their data centers uh, that we need. We're learning that we need water. Why do we need water for it? Why is this a problem? So here's a data center. They're huge, by the way. I'll show you a picture of them here in a second. These are the different modems, the different servers that sort of have that data, collect that data. And we have these cooling systems. So if you're running this much technology, you need to be able to cool some of this overheated material, right? And to do that, there's actually a couple different ways. You can either use air, which it doesn't quite work the way that some people want. The best way to do it is to use water, and you have to use fresh water for this. You can't use salt water because salt water is very corrosive. So we need fresh water to cool a system. The other big issue is that these data centers require very flat, easily accessible, and relatively cheap. I mean, everybody wants relatively cheap land. So where are we putting these data centers? I went down to Mesa, Arizona several years ago. This was several years ago too. And Mesa, Arizona, when I went in April, was at like 80 degrees. In the summer, Mesa, Arizona can get up to 120 degrees, but it's flat. It's very cheap. This was rich people winter home city. And so there were dozens of these data centers built there. This was for Amazon. This is NTTPH. I actually don't know what that means. When I was there, they were building one for Google. I think they're looking at building one for ChatGPT down here. But there's a few problems associated with this. A, where's this water coming from? The water is coming from Henry, I swear to God, the groundwater in this area. But this is an area in which that groundwater is being so depleted and not being recharged because we don't get a lot of precipitation in this area, right? So this is a huge problem in this area. My other favorite thing to note about this region is it's rich people winter home town. So what else do rich people like to do? I'm so glad you asked. They like to golf. And in Mesa, Arizona, there were five golf courses in Mesa, Arizona. And look how green these golf courses are. So I used to work at a golf course. I used to work at Bellingham Golf and Country Club. And I talked to some of the golf experts, and I was like, why can't you just use fake grass? Well, you can't use fake grass because then you don't get the friction and you don't get all of the swing. I don't know. It was a whole thing. You have to use real grass, apparently, for golf courses. This is also where all this water is going. So I do a whole talk in my environmental science class about the inaccessibility and inequities associated with water usage, and sort of how it's going to start to become an issue in the coming years of people need fresh water, but all the fresh water is going towards very rich corporations, um, and the pleasures of rich white people. Oopsie. ChatGPT has 200 million active users. Sorry, I forgot a zero here. Of those, an average user uses 8 chats or 8 questions a day. It only takes 20 to 50 questions to generate 100 milliliters of water. Okay, bear with me. This is about 100 milliliters. So you're like, okay, well, that's not a lot, which is 4 ounces of water for 50 questions. But because of all of these active users with these many questions a day, and as you can imagine, more people are asking more and more questions every day. This was 2 years ago. This was information from 2 years ago. We're producing 100 million gallons of wastewater a day just for ChatGPT. So I'm not going to linger on that because I know this has been a very long lecture and I do apologize. The next lecture shouldn't be this long, sorry. Next lecture will be climate change and we'll bring it all together in one fell swoop.